13 years old. Your hands are still small, clumsy as they try to braid your own hair. Your laugh is still childish, high and unsteady. You should be playing in a garden, chasing butterflies, scribbling letters you've just learned to write. But instead, you are told you carry England's future. Your belly is swelling. Not from the sweets of childhood, but from a child growing inside you. A body barely begun is being forced to create another. At 13, you are pregnant. And not just with any child, but with the heir who would one day sit upon the throne of England. They call it destiny. They call it duty. But history whispers another word. Stolen. Today, when we think of 13, we think of classrooms, friendships, the early glow of youth. In Margaret's world, 13 meant blood, pain, and the terrifying weight of motherhood. For her, innocence was a luxury denied. Margaret Beaufort was born in 1443, into a world where daughters were not raised for themselves, but for dynasties. She was the great heiress of the Beaufort line, descended from John of Gaunt, son of Edward III. To kings and nobles, her body was not her own. It was a vessel, a cradle for future power. From her earliest years, she was groomed for a role she could not understand. At the age when a modern child might still hold rag dolls, Margaret was pledged in betrothals, shifted like a piece of property between rival houses who saw in her bloodline the key to the English throne. Childhood as we know it, laughter, play, self-discovery, did not exist in the 15th century for girls like her. The moment she was born, she was no longer a child in the eyes of her family. She was an heir, a future mother of kings. The word childhood loses meaning when the expectation is that you will bleed, conceive, and give birth before you are even grown yourself. At 12, Margaret was married to Edmund Tudor, half-brother of King Henry VI. Married, though she was still small, thin, and frail from her youth. Married, though she had no say, no chance to refuse, no comprehension of what such a word truly meant. It was not a wedding born of affection. It was not a union of hearts. It was a transaction, cold and merciless. A child was bound to a man more than twice her age. And in that union, a demand was made: she must conceive. The court celebrated. To them, the match was a victory, a consolidation of power, a way to strengthen dynastic claims. To Margaret, it was a theft. Not of land or fortune, but of her own body. Marriage was not love. It was strategy. At 13, Margaret conceived. At 13, she carried a life that nearly destroyed her own. Pregnancy is perilous for any woman in the medieval age. But for a girl whose bones were not fully grown, whose hips were narrow, whose body was not ready, it was a gamble against death itself. Her labor lasted days. The pain was unimaginable. Each contraction tore at her young body, breaking it apart. The child, Henry Tudor, would one day wear the crown of England as Henry VII. But his birth was a near death for his mother. Margaret never bore another child again. The damage was permanent. At 13, her body was broken. She survived, but only just. And in surviving, she lived with the shadow of that moment forever. A dynasty was born. A childhood was buried. Margaret's story is not just history. It is a mirror, because what happened to her still happens, though the crowns and castles are gone. According to the World Health Organization, 2019, complications from pregnancy and childbirth remain the leading cause of death for girls aged 15 to 19 worldwide. The younger the girl, the higher the risk. At 13, the body is not ready, bones are soft, pelvis is narrow, blood is weak. Labor can tear, crush, and kill. Obstructed labor often leads to fistulas, internal damage that leaves young girls incontinent and shamed. Many bleed to death. Those who survive are often scarred beyond repair, unable to bear more children. Like Margaret, their one pregnancy is also their last. Imagine the terror. A girl who has never lived her own childhood, suddenly responsible for another life. The cries of her newborn are placed in her arms while she herself is still a child. Trauma, fear, and silence follow. She cannot speak of what was done to her. She must smile, must obey, must endure. And the baby? Children born to child mothers face greater risks: premature birth, low weight, fragile survival. A child born from a child, both unready for the world. At 13, she became a mother. But she never stopped being a child. Margaret's story feels distant, wrapped in the dust of the 15th century. But the shadow stretches into our own world. In 2023, UNICEF reported that 12 million girls under 18 are married each year. Many of them, like Margaret, become mothers before their bodies are ready. The geography is different now: sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, pockets of the Middle East, even rural parts of developed nations. But the pain is the same. History repeats not in crowns, but in silence. The age has changed. The suffering has not. Margaret Beaufort was remembered as the mother of kings, the matriarch of the Tudor dynasty. History celebrated her endurance, her piety, her role as a political survivor. But history forgets the girl. The child. The 13-year-old who nearly died in childbirth, whose body was broken before it had finished growing, whose voice was never heard. When we look back, we see a dynasty secured. But when we look deeper, we see a childhood lost, a girl forced into womanhood by the merciless demands of power. A crown made her a queen. A womb made her a prisoner. And in the echo of her story lies a warning. Child marriage is not gone. Child pregnancy is not gone. What was once done in castles is now done in silence, in poverty, in forgotten corners of our modern world. Margaret's story is not a relic. It is a reminder. History does not forget. It waits.